Welcome to lesson 2B, where we'll be looking majorly at the cascading style sheet, right? In the previous video, we showed how to define our master page and the extended pages, how we can be able to define our flags routes and define our flags function, and also how we can be able to set up our blueprints, right? So now in this video, what we're going to do is we're going to introduce the cascading style sheet. We all know that the cascading style sheet is a language used to describe the presentation, which is the look and formatting of a document written in the hypertext markup language, right? So now it controls how web pages are styled and laid out, right? So since we're dealing with markup hypertext HTML, not the XML, we're going to skip XML for now. So it controls how web pages are styled and laid out, making them more visually appealing, right? Now, CSS allows you to apply styles like colors, font, spacing, layouts, and even animations to elements on your web pages. So we're going to look at the basic CSS styling. Right, the basic CSS styling starts with the selector, which we're going to look at the types of selectors that we have, right? Then the properties, and then the value. You can see that the selector identifies which HTML element the style applies to, which can be your class name, it can be the ID name, right? Or can be the HTML document name itself, right, which we're going to learn here, right? So the property specifies the style you want to change, which can be the color, the font size, the margin, padding, and so many of them, right? Then the values define the value for the property. So before we move forward, we're going to explain the ways of adding. This is very important. Explain the ways of adding CSS style to HTML documents. Right? We have three ways of adding CSS style to HTML documents. We have the inline styling, style applied directly to the HTML elements using the style attributes. Now let's go to our Visual Studio. So we'll go to our global templates file, which is this, which I've created in the previous classes, and this is the index.html. Now the inline styling, right? So let's assume this is the body, right? So I want to add color to the body. So all I will do, applying the inline styling within this body here, within this HTML body here, I'll put style here, right? So let me put a background, right? Then let me put call linear gradient because I want to add like two colors. Let me say to right. So I want to add two colors. I want to add dark blue and dark green. So now this mixture of these two colors is using this function here. So what it does is that this goes to the right because I'm pushing this first color down to the right. So let's run this and see. Okay, I've not actually. So before we run this, you can see my terminal is not on yet. So I will go to my terminal, new terminal. So by default, the virtual environment is not activated. So every time you create new terminal, always remember to activate your virtual environment. Okay, then I will run the program file.py. Okay, so I will go to my browser now. Let me type the URL, which is default URL. Okay, you can see what happens here. You can see what happens. So the blue is like pushing. The dark blue is pushing to the right. You can see it. So if we do to left, you will see the dark green will push to the left. To left. Let's run this again. You can see the dark green now push to the left. Can you see that what happens? So that is how it works, right? So that is what you can actually use one color, right? But I prefer using it, makes my work look beautiful, right? So you can see this is an example of inline styling, right? This is an example of inline styling. So what about the internal styling? Right. So the internal styling, CSS placed inside a style tag in the head section of a HTML document. Now, instead of us doing this, right? Instead of us doing this, I will just remove this. This is inline. So instead of us doing this inline styling, I will just remove this and then put the styling in the inner head, HTML head, right? Within the HTML head here. So I'll put style, close it, enter, then put the class, not the class, I'll put the body like this, right? So I'm done with this. So if I, this is called the internal styling. So if I run this, it still give me the same thing, right? You can see it still give me the same thing. So let's try to change it if it reflects. So let's put right here. Let's put right here. Okay, you can see. So this is what we call internal styling. So now what about external styling? External styling is a separate CSS file which is linked to the HTML document using a link tag in the head section. Now, this is a preferred method for that website. Now, to me, this is the best pattern because when you write a styling in a separate sheet, in a CSS sheet, you can easily apply it to all your HTML documents, right? Once you put it in the master page, every extended pages can inherit that same CSS class, right? So this is actually the best styling to use, right? So now the external styling doesn't work in Flask here. So I will show you guys the standardized way to use it in Flask function, right? So now let's remove this, right? So remember that when we're creating our folders, right, we have this global static file. Now this global static file, if I open it, it contains our CSS and our JavaScript file, which I said in our previous lecture in class that we can also add more folders here. Like let me add like images here, img. So when we implement our application, all images will be stored inside there. So anything that has to do with images, CSS, JavaScript, everything will be stored in here, right, inside the static files. So now you can see that inside the static file, we have a folder called the CSS folder, right? So if I open the CSS folder, I already created a script called the style.css. Now, if I open this, you can see the script is blank, right? So now let's apply this body. Okay, let me see if I copied it so that I will not end up like, okay, I copied it, right? So what I will do is, all right, body. So within that body, I paste this, right? So you can see how I've placed the body, the background, right, inside the external style sheet, which is the style.css, right? So now we'll come to the index page, right? Now let me explain something here. Well, we're going to link this. Now you can see I've already linked it, but let me just explain. Let me write it again so you see. So we start to move this. This is not important, right? It's not necessary. So let's assume that I've been written it before. So I start with the link, right? Which is what the style sheet, right? This is style sheet. So the type, the type is text CSS, right? So now this is one is the most important. This one is the most important. Now I can decide to use static like because the style sheet is located in the static folder, right? Static slash, right? Then inside the static folder, if you open it, you have the CSS folder, right? Slash. Then inside the CSS folder, you have a style, right? I have style.css. Now I can decide to use this, but this is not actually a good practice if you're using the Plus framework because most times if you're doing more if you're publishing these to a shared hosting or the online hosting, they may not actually get this part because this part is actually in another part, right, which is in app folder. So now to play safe, right, to play safe, it's better to use this pattern. It's better to use this pattern because play safe is better to use the double braces like this, right? You can see what I did. Then the URL for which is redirecting to the you have to specify the folder where it's located, which is by default is a static folder, right? So we put a comma here, right? So the file name, there is a folder where the file name is being stored, which is a CSS folder. This CSS folder is stored inside static folder. Okay, you can see the CSS folder is inside the static folder here, then slash style dot css, right? So this is what we did here. So with this, your web document, your master page can easily look up to the external style sheet, which is a style of CSS, which is located in this CSS folder. So this is the best practice, right? So always use this practice for your CSS and also use this practice for your JavaScript files, right? Which will be writing it in an external script like this also. So we're not writing any CSS style here. We're not writing any JavaScript here because it's actually not a good practice, right? Okay. So Now we are done with this, so let's see if it works. So we run this again. Okay, so let's confirm if it worked. I'll go to my style page, which is this now. So let me take this back to the right. All right, so if I go here, okay, now you can see finally we have our standard style. So let's go to our PowerPoint slide. Now we have different types of selectors, right? CSS selectors. So selectors are used to select and style specific elements in HTML. Now here are some common CSS selectors, right? So we have the type selector, selects all elements of a specific type. That is what we did. So what we're doing was a type selector. You can see the what we did here. We have a selector called body, right? Where's my code again? We have a selector called body. Yeah. So now let me go to the index.html, right? Now we have another selector called header. So what I will do here, I will write it like this, header. So let's assume that I want to add background to the header. I want to make it black, right? Okay. Now if I run this will be black, right? You can see. Now this is what we call the selector type, right? Or the type selector, right? So you're not actually specifying a class. So what if I want to do a class? Now the class selector selects element to the specific class. A class is denoted by a dot, right? Followed by the class name. So now what if I don't want to use the type selector. I want to just use a class. So what I will do here is I'll go to my CSS file and let's assume there's a class call. I'll put a dot here. Remember it's denoted by a dot. So now if I run this will not actually work anymore because I've not actually specified class, right? But if I go to the HTML document, right? So in the body here, I'll put a class, right? And I'll call it body. Now watch what happens. You can see, right? You can see the two different types of, and we have the type selectors and we have the class selectors. Now, if I put the class here, if I put header, right? So you can see now it depends on which one you want to use, right? That suits your design, right? So most people prefer to use classes because classes, once you define properties, CSS properties in a particular class, you can be able to apply to any type selector, right? But if you're using a type selector, that means it must be that type. You can see the differences. Now, do you understand what I mean? So if you are writing a CSS file for a particular type, that means it's only applied to that type. But if you are writing a CSS if you're writing a CSS properties for a class, that means you can apply to any type. So let's do something. Now let's assume that I want this one to be body also, right? Header class also body. So it means that this header type, right? This type selector, which is header, it will inherits these the properties which is being defined in the class body, right? Which is being defined because we have a class called body, right? So it will still inherit this. So if I run this, it will still give me the same color. Can you see that? It still gives me the same color. But you not notice because they're actually the same color. So that is how the class works. So that's why class is more preferable, right? So let me just take it back. Let me take it back to the type selector. Okay. So let me take this back to the type selector. So you guys understood the difference between a type selector and a class selector. So what about the next one we're going to look at here is the ID selector. Another good example is the ID selector, where select an element with a specific ID. So an ID is denoted by a hash followed by the name, right? So remember the class is denoted by dots. So ID is just like this. You put hash, right? Then hash. Let's assume that these are IDs, right? Okay, let me open this hash. These are IDs and these are ID. Now let's see if there's a disadvantage of using ID. Right. So now in the body part, I may say ID, which is body, right? ID. Then in the header, I may still say ID. Let's find out something. Body. So let's run this. It didn't actually give me an error because the IDs, they are both the same IDs, which is looking at same properties. But it's not actually a good practice because in some framework, this will trigger an error because two type selector is not supposed to have same ID, right? Especially when you are trying to run it's not really good practice to use this, right? But it's not a good practice. It's better to use a class because in some frameworks this will trigger an error because the ID is supposed to be unique, right? So let's look for the other ones. It works here, right? Because they are the same. Let me use header here, which is the ID for this. Okay, it works, but in it's not really good at design to actually use same ID for different type selector, right? So let's look at the other one. Now we've understood the type selector, we've understood the class selector, and the ID selector, then the universal selector, which is denoted as this, as a star symbol like this, right? So once you use the universal selector, it applies to all the types, all the HTML types that we have in our document here. So let's see something. So when I do this, instead of me using this, I'll just use this star symbol, right? And I have this property, right? So let's see something. You can see to override. Let's find out something. All right, despite we put the header, which is ID, let me confirm. Now there's an header here, right? There's a ID header, right? Which is black. But despite we put it here, right? And we have already made this a universal. So the universal is overriding this. So that's why we have this. You can see what happens. Right? You can actually see what happens. So that is how the universal work, which is I won't advise this, but definitely I'm just trying to show you guys all the selectors we have in CSS. Okay, now let's go to the last one, which is the descendant selector. Now the descendant selector is like this. Um, now if we go to the HTML, right? So we have like a let me say this is the parent selector header. So now this is like a descendant selector now. So let's assume that I want to add so what I will do is I have an header like this with a type selector and also have a nav. So this is like a descendant selector, right? So once we are applying the properties, it's applying to this nav that is on the inside this header. So that is how the descendant selector works, right? So now we understood how the selectors works now. So we're going to move basically to designing. Now, since you understood how this works, right? So I know that you can be able to learn because there's no way you can learn all CSSs in a particular semester completely. There's no way you can become a professional. But the only way for you to learn and develop yourself is to pick up a project, just like as we did, then start design that project. So the more you design, the more you learn, right? So that is what we did here. So now, common CSS properties, we have the color and background, which will use this. We have the font size, which you can add fonts, then text alignment. So now I will not explain this in deep, right? So what I will do is let's just I'll move all this one. So let's now this is the index.html, right? So let's make this final, right? So let me remove this. So what I will do, I'll be using a type selector, right? I will just use a type selector for this, right? There are some other places I will use classes, but since these are like constants, right? The header is constant, the nav is constant, the here, the li, this is the list, and the anchor. I will just use a type selector. So I'll go to the style here. The first thing I will do is use a type selector, which is a body. Then I'll add a background to the body. Then I actually love linear gradient. I don't know why I love linear gradients because it makes two colors for me. I love it. So to write, so I will have let me use dark green. So let me use black. Okay, black. Makes sense this way, right? Okay. Uh that's cool. So if I go to yeah, so let's begin one by one. Okay, my color is good. Now in this place here, I want to use black, then mix it white in my header. So I will go to my header. Okay, get to my header. So I'll use let me have background. So let me still use a linear gradient to right. And let me use white here, and let me use black here. Okay. So if we do this, you see it becomes this black, white. But let me take it to, I don't like, let me take it to left. Okay, cool, right? So now on the HTML side, now we have the nav, right? So I want the text to be at the middle. So I have my header, I have my nav. You can see this is descendant, right? So dependent, right? So I'll have my, let me see, text align. Now this text align, we take all the text. I want it to take all the text to center, right? So if you do this, you can see it's giving you, once you put this, it's giving you all, once you put this column here, it's giving you all the stuff here, right? For this text align. So now all I want is center. So that's why you need to be playing with this so that you get used to it, right? So, okay, so let's run this. Cool. Now they're in center, right? You can see they're in center, but they're not really well. I want to align them straight, right? So what I will do now is I have my header, I have my nav, then the UL. So let me see. I have my header, nav, UL. Okay. Right. So UL and also have my LI, right? I also have my LI. So let me just put LI here because I want to remove that bullet. Okay, LI not list. Just list. LI. So I have my list type, style type, which is none. So this will remove that bullet from that place. Let me just check. There's a bullet here which you can see, but it will remove it. I can't see the color, but it's like a black color. Okay, which will remove it. So now on the anchor is one that has the text. So have the NIULLIA, which is the anchor. So we have the text operator, which will actually remove the underline, those underline and stuff, which is none, make it none. So if you now it has removed it, right? So now I want it to be straight. So only the straight I'm going to define it in the list here, which is display inline block, or it can be used, you can use inline flex if you want to use that. Okay, now it's cool, right? But is I want it to have let me apply padding to the header. Let me put 5 pixels and see. Okay, 5 pixels is good. So you can see 5 pixels here, 5 pixels here. I've applied padding here. So let me apply spacing to each of the text here, each of the lists, because the anchor is inside the list, right? So the anchor is inside the list. So let me apply spacing. And let me use this margin right? So margin right, let me use 5 pixels and see if it's okay. Okay, you can see the spacing is a little bit, not that is okay, but it's a little bit okay, right? So let's make it white. Let's make this white. Let's make this white. So I'll have my color here, then white. Okay. Now, okay, then if you want to like over, like if I put my pointer here, my mouse pointer here, this should show black, and this, then all you just need to do is to use over for the anchor. So do I will just do header nav ULLIA, then over, right? This is what I'll just do. Then I'll define what I want. So now doing the over, oh sorry. So doing the over, let's say I have my test color, right? So test color can be black, not test color, sorry. Color can be black, then the background itself can be white. Let's see what happens. You can see what happens, right? The background is white and the color is black. You can see what happens. You can see the hover here. So that is how simple it is, right, to work with CSS actually, and sweet to actually work with CSS, right? So now we have our spacing. Where do we have our spacing margin, right? So let's assume that we don't want the last child to actually have any spacing. So all you just need to do is, you can see what I did here. Then you can use last child, right? Last child like this, something like this. So then make it 0 pixel, make it 0. You can remove this the creator because we already assigned creator. So that is how, this is just the basic of CSS, right? So we're not going to go deep in front end design here because the main aim of this class is to actually design a complete data driven web application. But guys, I'll show you guys how CSS work and how can manipulate it. I'll show you guys the best practice. You can see what happens. I'll show you guys the best practice to CSS styling, right? I'll show you guys the best practice to CSS styling. Let me increase this. It's best practice to CSS styling. Then what we're going to do in the next class is we're going to look at models, how we can create our models. But first, I will show you guys how on the database to use, right? You can, like I said, we can use any relational database management system. So you guys can install before the next class, then we'll start defining our models. After we define our models on the Flask framework, we'll migrate our models to the database which we are using. You can use any database, right? So I'll teach you guys how to use any database. So with any relational database. So when we migrate it, we'll see all our tables there, right? That will be next class, right? So I will, even if you don't have knowledge of that, don't worry. I'm going to teach it in a way that you guys can easily understand it and see that it's actually very, very simple. Hope you understand this. So let me check if my navigation is working. Welcome to faculty list department. Remember that I told you guys to do the rest, right? So actually, you can see it's not too fine, but this is just a starting step. You can see how the power of CSS. Thank you and God bless you.